compared to Hitler, being compared to Putin, being compared to Osama bin Laden, and to the guy over there in Iran, I'm drawing a blank, Saddam Hussein. And that type of leader, that type of person that's known for their cruelty and known as the most wanted, that was Barabbas. And when they came to let him out of the cell that day, he thought, man, I'm ready to be crucified. I'm ready to be put to death because of the insurrection, because of the murder that I've done. But as he stood there, we see that he is released instead of Jesus. And it's because of the custom that they had that a prisoner could be released. Only one prisoner, and it's whomever they chose. Well, Pilate gave them a choice, Jesus or Barabbas. And we see the multitudes there. The crowd had gathered to ask for the release of a prisoner. And who had influenced them to say, free Barabbas? The chief priest. Yeah, they said, say Barabbas, free Barabbas. And so they cried out, free Barabbas. And then Pilate says, well, what am I going to do with this man named Jesus, who's king of the Jews? He's your king. What do you want me to do with him? And what did they say? Crucify him. And they said that twice, as we read in Mark's gospel. And so then we have the soldiers also who took Jesus away on the orders of Pilate. And they mocked Jesus. And ultimately, they are the ones that crucify him. They're the ones that drive the nails into his hands and into his feet. And they stand guard there. And they take that seamless robe that was made by his mother. And they didn't want to divide it between them. So what did they do? They gambled, didn't they? To have one person to receive that prized possession of the one being crucified. With such a review of those present during the civil trial before Pilate, two of the three stages that we see, the first time to Pilate, then the second time, let's consider some of the charges that they made on Jesus. Here's what they said. And these were made by the chief priest. They said, first of all, he perverts the nation. How did Jesus pervert the nation of Israel? He went about doing good, didn't he? Remember, that's what Luke says in Acts. He went about doing good. He healed people from various diseases. He had the lame to walk, the blind to see, the deaf to hear. He raised people from the dead. He fed the multitudes. And he did a lot of teaching. And, you know, there's nothing that Jesus did that would pervert the nation of Israel. Well, their second charge is, he forbids to pay taxes to Caesar. Now, what did Jesus say when he was approached about paying taxes? Didn't he say, give me a coin? And he says, whose inscription's on it? Caesar. And he says, render unto Caesar, that is Caesar's, and unto the Lord, that is the Lord's. And then also one time he had his disciple go fishing, catch a fish, and what was in the fish's mouth? An offering to be taken into the temple. It was money found in the fish's mouth. And so Jesus never was one to cheat on paying taxes. Even the ladies that supported him in his ministry, no doubt they paid the temple tax each year, and that he was above the law on that because he was sinless. So that's a false claim. Well, then the third one, they said, well, he claims to be the Christ. Well, he is the Christ. He is the Messiah. How can you find fault there? And then they said, well, he claims to be king. Well, he was king. He is king even today. And they said that he stirs up the people, teaching throughout Judea and Galilee. But all he taught was about love, wasn't it? To show the Father to those people, to show compassion, and to offer forgiveness. What about the lady that was caught in the act of adultery? What did he say to her? Go and commit this sin of adultery no more. Okay? So he was going about doing good. And when Pilate heard these charges, he asked Jesus, he says, are you the king of the Jews? to which Jesus admitted. And even though that his kingdom was not of this world, his kingdom was a spiritual kingdom. And Pilate marveled at Jesus' silence after one after another of these charges coming up against Jesus. Jesus stood there and didn't say anything. He didn't retaliate. He didn't say, no, that's wrong, that's false. He was silent, as a lamb is silent before its shearer. And Pilate knew that these religious leaders had trumped up these charges, and he also knew that they brought Jesus to him out of envy. Because these religious leaders had lost their followers. They lost their disciples. Where were they going to listen to teaching now? They were going to Jesus, weren't they? Because he taught as one who had authority. And also we see that even Pilate's wife, what did she say when she sent word to Pilate, her husband? She said, honey, don't have anything to do with this man. I've suffered greatly in a dream last night about him. So even Pilate's wife knew that he was not guilty, and for Pilate not to stick his hand in a pie that didn't belong in, okay? But even though that Pilate knew that Jesus was innocent, because of the crowd and because he didn't want a tumult, he didn't want an uprising that wouldn't look good on his record, that he decided to have him scourged and also later on to be crucified, to give in to the crowd. And you remember what Pilate did? He took a basin of water and he washed his hands and he said, I am innocent of this man's blood. But was he? No, he wasn't innocent of the blood of Jesus. Well, now we come to what I consider the third part of this lesson tonight, and that is the abuse that was put upon Jesus by the Roman soldiers. As Pilate ordered for Jesus to be scourged. Does any of you have any idea of what that means when it says that Jesus was scourged?
Worse than a whooping.
Worse than a whooping. Okay.
Cat o' nine tails.
Cat o' nine tails. That's another way that it's called. And this is what I found from the Greek word and from the Bible dictionary, combining both of them together, and listen closely. This involved being tied to a post and beaten with a leather whip that was interwoven with pieces of bone and metal, which tore through skin and tissue, often exposing bones and intestines. In many cases, the flogging itself was fatal. That a lot of them died just from the flogging, from the scourging, as Tony called it, the cat o' nine tails. It was like a whip that was long with leather strips, and interwoven in that was bone and pieces of metal. Can you imagine a strong Roman soldier standing back and lashing that across the bare back of a person who is tied to be whipped? And they did it 39 times. The King James will say 40 lashes minus one. And they always stopped at 39. Because if they went over, then the person who did the scourging, then he would be taken to the whipping post and he would be scourged. So nobody wanted to go over 40, so they stopped at 39. And that's what Jesus went through, was this scourging of the cat o' nine tails. He was then walked by soldiers who led Jesus to the hall called the Praetorium, who clothed him with purple. Why did they clothe him in purple?
Royalty.
Royalty. Royalty. That's what royalty wore, was purple. Very expensive dye. And so they said, you're king of the Jews? Okay, we'll put you in a purple robe. And they bowed down and worshipped him, made fun and saluted him and said, "Hail, King of the Jews." And then they put a crown of thorns on his head, and they took a reed, which was about 18 inches in length, and they pounded it into his head. It's kind of like a baseball bat, and pounding those thorns in through his skull. And what's going to happen when it pierces the skin? Blood's going to flow with it. Okay? And then they spat on him. We've seen that before in our lessons. Mark kind of covers that quite a bit, doesn't he, in his gospel near the end. And who mockingly worshipped him, who stripped him and put back on his own clothes, that seamless garment. Well, again, we see through the Bible that it tells us of the barbaric injustice that Jesus faced even before his crucifixion. The false charges and the physical abuse, a cowardly governor giving in to a manipulative crowd that were pressured by the religious leaders to say, free Barabbas and to crucify Jesus. But lest we forget, all of this was in keeping with God's providence. Wasn't this God's will for Jesus to be crucified? Now, go if you would over to Acts and turn to page 802. 802 in the Pew Bible.
Excellent.
And we'll go at verse 22. Acts chapter 2, verse 22 through 24. We'll read these three verses.